of the IET in India. I'll lead this session. I'd like to call one by one my fellow panelists who will be in this panel. I start by calling Suchishmita Sanyal, General Manager, Computational Science, Shell. I've got it. Thank you. We'll get to know a bit more about Suchishmita in a little while. Next, I'd like to call on stage Mr. Chetan Segahalli, Head Digitalization, Siemens Advanta. Hi, Chetan. Next, I'd like to call Mr. Dilip Sahani, Managing Director, Rockwell Automation. Hi. And finally, Krishnan Chatterjee, CEO, Markets and Markets. Right. So the conversation is about how sustainable is sustainability. But before we really get into that, I think it would be good if all of you introduce yourselves and talk a bit about your background so that everybody knows where you're coming from. Shall we start with you?
Awesome. Thank you, Shekhada. Well, great to be back here. And previous session was coming between food and you. This session, before we induce food coma, let's get the topic started. I am Suchi. I am the General Manager of Computational Science at Shell. Delighted to be here. I lead a group of 50 researchers in Bangalore, Houston, and Netherlands, where we are focusing on digitalization, sustainability, and energy transition. Some of the things we will touch upon in our topic today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask Chetan?
Thanks, Shekhar. Welcome all again, as Suchi said, after food. So we will try not to induce further coma. My name is Chetan. I'm from Siemens Advanta. I'm responsible for digitalization and technology solutions here in Siemens Advanta Development India. We touch upon various topics, including sustainability, not just restricted to sustainability, but then how digital solutions can enable our customers to make use of various technology aspects that are available to deliver what their customers want, because we are primarily a B2B business. So looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks, Chetan. Can I ask you to?
Sure. Thanks, Shekhar, and good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be a part of this Congress, and my first. And it's been a great session so far. Dilip Sahani, I lead the Rockwell Automation business for India. I've been in the company for 13 years now. Rockwell Automation, some of you might know, we are a global leader in industrial automation and digital transformation, and that digital transformation has a role to play in helping tackle the sustainability question marks that we have in front of us. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Krishnan.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Krishnan. I'm with a firm called Markets and Markets, which sort of researches all the disruption that's going around us today. We see disruption accounting for $25 trillion worth of new revenue opportunity for B2B businesses in this decade. Sustainability is one of the biggest of that number. And glad to be here and learning from this panel today.
Thank you so much, Krishnan. But I'll take an opportunity because you're the data and figures man. So why don't you start us off by giving us a basic concept around the business? So you talked about some $1 trillion, basic concepts of sustainability, how it's going, how the markets are treating, what are the opportunities which are coming out, which areas. I think it will set a context for us and for everybody here to understand and have a conversation. So why don't you do that?
Sure, Shekhar. So, when we pick up a topic like how sustainable is sustainability, from an economic consideration, nothing is really sustainable unless it makes economic sense. So, when I was looking at this topic, what stood out for me is we've just, sort of finished COP27. And between COP26 and COP27, what seems to have happened is from a 1.5 degree global target, we have now accepted a 2.5 degree target. So net, we have sort of planned to fail. And the reason is funding. So everybody is out there saying, who's really going to fund all of this? Now, while that is one interesting dimension that's emerging, the other one which struck me hard is the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, this January made a comment that sustainability-based investments have just crossed $4 trillion. So on one side, we have the various COPs not able to fund and planning to fail. On the other side, you have one of the leading investment leaders talking about a $4 trillion investment. And, you know, interestingly, if I just look at it through the financial services lens, another data point which struck me is the asset management industry earned about $1 billion in fees for investments involving sustainability in 2020. In 2021, they earned $1.8 billion in fees. So that's $800 million more for just one sliver of one industry. So there does appear to be a lot of money in this. It's just that somehow that money is not manifesting in, let's say, through the lens of economics. Now, if we were to apply the lens of economics and just look at sustainability as a business opportunity, and I think the August panel here, all of them are doing that. By our research, there is a $4.7 trillion opportunity just till 2026. So if, let's say, India were to just stop everything else and say, we are focused on sustainability as a theme in manufacture, you would start operating in that $4.7 trillion addressable market. And this touches all industries. So whether I look at aerospace, where you talked about sustainable fuel already, or there is electric aircraft, whether I look at F&B, you're talking about eco-friendly packaging. Chemicals, we are looking at sustainable packaging, polymers because of the whole EV revolution, the whole energy transition space. In fact, in your business, clients we serve in energy, we've seen the digital twin as their number one investment in process industries. So if I were to just break this down to a few companies which caught my eye, and I'm just going to quote some numbers. Engie in 2020 degrew negative by 26%. They changed their focus entirely to serving the cause of renewables. In 2021, they grew 30% plus, and in 2022, they grew, in fact, 85% plus. So, that's an incredible story of turnaround. Obviously, it is pandemic influenced as well, but it is a story of focus. I have another company here, Freeport-McMoRan, which focused on selling copper to renewables and the EV sector. They had negative growth in 2019, pre-pandemic. But by 2021, they were 60% plus growth. Similarly, if I will look at Indorama Ventures, who made an acquisition called Wellman in order to recycle PET bottles, since 2017 to current year, they have doubled recycling. They've also doubled their turnover from 10 billion to 20 billion. So actually, if you just pick business stories, you will find there is a lot of money in sustainability, and sustainability should be quite sustainable. With that, I hand it back to you.
Thank you. But, I mean, that's the premise that we all start from, that sustainability should be sustainable, and it is. That's what your numbers say. That's what we have been hearing for a long time. But things are changing. We are having a war, which is happening. There is a looming recession, which seems to be the worst ever that we probably have seen in our lifetimes at least. And it doesn't seem to be going away very soon. In fact, I was reading this morning that Collins Dictionary word for 2022, which they introduced this year, is perma-crisis. A crisis which is going to be so permanent that there's a word for it. It's going to stay for long, and that's their word for 2022. Now, in such a scenario, as things keep changing, do you think the appetite for the long-term gain or the benefit that sustainability brings versus the shareholder pressure of short-term, is that going to impact the way businesses start relooking at their sustainability efforts? So, can I start with you to
Yeah, sure.
give your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's, like in a nutshell, the question is planet or profit. Luckily, the business that we are in, and Dilip will, I'm sure, chime in later. The business that we are in, like Siemens, for example, we make our products. So we have a bunch of factories where we make our products. And our products, in turn, are used by our consumers, who are other businesses, to build something else. So what we experiment with our portfolio, we are in a position to sell it to our customers as well. This year, or rather 21, we had almost 20% of our revenue coming in from our environment portfolio. So what do you mean by environment portfolio? It could be different ways of distributing electricity. It could be building circular economy enabled products. So when you design a product, you keep its end of life also in mind. So you know that this will at some point in time become landfill waste, or whatever might be its destiny at the end of the life, right? So now that you are aware of its lifetime, you already start designing it. And this we do very well using our digital twins. So we are making good amount of money. As I said, almost 20% of the revenue is made on this. And this is just one part of it, okay? Now the second part, just like ourselves, we have committed to go carbon neutral by 2030. Almost every company worth its weight in salt has committed to go carbon neutral by some or the other day. So it is not just their own carbon, it is also scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Like what happens by, or how do you get your power, and what happens when people use it downstream and upstream. So in our case, we do use 78%, morning Pankaj spoke about it, 78% of our power, our energy comes from renewables. Now I think soon enough we will hit 100%, but the more ambitious target is we want to make sure that our emissions go down across supply chain by 20% by 2030. So these are like really ambitious targets. So what am I trying to say? Just like we do it for ourselves, our customers also have those targets. So there is certainly a lot of money that will be made, can be made, and should be made. And maybe I'll continue with my agriculture example later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love your context of the perma crisis, because that is the world we are living in, Shekhar, right? And in Shell, we actually call it chronic unease, right? Be in a state of permanent unease. Don't be complacent with the current, because the current is going to change very soon, right? And how do we respond to that change? In two ways. So earlier last year, in Feb last year, we released our Powering Progress strategy, which is the entire business model for Shell and its 73,000 employees. It is based on 4 pillars. The very first one is, as Chetan alluded to, generating shareholder value, right? Without which we would not be sitting here today. The second one of equal importance is getting net zero. Again, to Chetan's point that for every company its money's worth, we have a pledge. The third and fourth one are interesting. The third one is about powering lives. So how do we take our societies and ecosystem in this business journey, which for me was quite revealing, right? And the fourth one, equally important, is respecting nature. How do we do all of this, make money, make profit, but in a way that we respect our ecological balance and do not disrupt nature, right? So these 4 are our primary pillars, which has been announced, which is something we are going to be measured against. So we are pretty serious about it, right? Coming now to your own initial question, I think the way we can make money within this crisis is by first starting with our home ground, which is cleaning our own assets. As Krishnan said, there's a lot of money to be made in asset management, right? So the way we do it for across Shell, the assets we have, how can we increase operational efficiency of our liquefied natural gas, of our integrated gas, of our upstream portfolio, even a 1% squeeze of efficiency there by digitalization, by carbon neutrality is huge, huge money. And just to give you an example, we are having 2 trillion rows of data coming in from our assets in our data lake, which we are managing, optimizing, and giving rise to bottom line profit. I'll give you more examples down the way, just to give a bit of context of where we are making money now and how it's going to make us sustainable, right?
Thank you. Fascinating.
Just to
Yeah,
add,
please
okay,
go ahead.
meaning, like it shouldn't sound like 4 capitalist minded people are talking about making money out of sustainability. The topic itself is how sustainable it is.
Absolutely.
Okay?
No.
So we just don't want to
Don't worry.
give out that impression.
I mean, if it is not sustainable, then it is not sustainable. Yeah, so that's how it is. So it's fair to have a conversation. Money is not a dirty word, but it is very important to understand that you're producing the right outcomes for it. Fascinating conversations. Dilip, if you'd like to talk about.
Sure. No, I think first of all, I agree with, the context that has already been said. I want to pick up on a comment that you made, Shekhar, and you spoke about the context there being war. And I'll challenge you to, just for a moment, hypothetically, eliminate that. Imagine there was no war playing out. If you were to imagine a scenario that there's a relative, no pandemic, no war, right? Even then, the context for manufacturing businesses, it's not easy, right? You have consumers who are vying for greater service, a greater diversity of products, et cetera, et cetera. Our choices are getting spoiled on the one hand. The other thing is, to access raw materials is just going to become harder and harder and harder, right? And I can give you another 10 examples right now, but I'll pause here. Why? Because the game of manufacturing in particular, which is one of the 4 tracks today, right? It is getting more and more complex, and status quo is not the answer. And I haven't even yet reached sustainability, right? So if status quo is not the answer, if you really have to disrupt, you have to think about this whole thing afresh and gain competitiveness, in a new reality, right? You have to rewire the whole equation, right? And when you have the opportunity to rethink, right? And there is a context right now. If you did not consider sustainability to be a compelling reality, you only have to go out and check in with the next generation, right? Talk to a 10, 12-year-old, right? I had a moment of, a similar moment. I've had many of these in the last few months, where I was having dinner with a friend, just less than a week back, and there was a kid who was sitting at the dinner table, absolutely bored with the fact that, 3 adults are sitting, and then the talk reached somehow sustainability, right? And that's when his eyes lit up, and he made only one comment. He said that you guys are talking about, all of this stuff, and, you're talking about green hydrogen and such. I don't think there's anything that you're doing which is really green. And, this is a kid that's talking, right? And, I think this reality has to hit us and hit us very, very hard. And we haven't yet started thinking about it. There are enormous number of data points that have already been cited here, right? There is value in here. You can almost look at it at the other way around, right? If you're ignoring the reality, some of the data points that Krishnan shared, right? Then you're just you're not looking at the facts then. And the other thing which I wanted to call out, which is what I cited, is if you continue to practice your game the way you've done 5 years ago, right? You will just run out of options. So I'll just bring it back home that, you really just must disrupt yourselves. Now, complexity is here to stay. You used a very interesting paradigm, chronic unease or something to that effect. I think that's a beautiful way to look at it, right? This complexity is just going to be here with us all through. And if you look at it, sustainability can seem very overwhelming, seen through this lens, but it need not. And hopefully, during the next few minutes, we'll have an opportunity to talk about what some of the options available are. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, thanks, Dilip, for that. But I'm going to pick up on what you said some time back, that it shouldn't feel like 3 capitalists or 4 capitalists are sitting and talking about how to make money out of it. So where I'm coming from is that all of you work, except Krishnan, he's in a startup, but a fairly large startup. But all of you work for large multinational companies, right? So where sustainability is working, you can afford it. But how does it keep changing for people who are running everyday medium-sized businesses, which are so many of them? How does sustainability start working? And on the same line, I'll start thinking about the developed world and the developing world. For example, if you take Africa, Africa contributes about 5% of the inputs into the global warming. But if they want to tackle it, then they have to spend about 25% of the total budgets that are required. Now, how much sense does it make for a country or Africa as a continent to start looking at spending so much amount of money, which is already not so rich country, to manage the burden that is coming from somewhere else? And does it still play into the conversation, the thought process of doing this or not? So does it change? So in gist, does it change when you move from a large, big company to a smaller company, the thought of sustainability? Does it change when you move from a rich, developed country? Because all of you have your headquarters outside. So maybe a lot of stuff that is being driven in your organization is being driven from somewhere else. But if we were to happen the same thing in India, would it be driven by the same kind of thought process? So,
so what I'll do is, I'll allow the other panelists to take the difficult part of medium-sized industries. I'll switch to something that is a bit more interesting and also challenging. So, when it comes to emissions, general tendency is to blame aviation. Aviation, because it's very visible, like you fly and you feel guilty about it, but aviation does 2% of contribution to emission. Agriculture has much, much larger contribution to emission. Now let's understand if there is something possible in agriculture. And I happen to be with this founder of a startup 10 days ago. It's a Bangalore-based startup. It's called Nurture.farm. So what they do is work with the farmers to understand how they can reduce the emissions. Now one example, and they are doing this very successfully with rice farming. Now if you know rice farming, it's always submerged in water. And because it is submerged in water, there are these anaerobic bacteria which generate methane. And methane is, I think, factor of 80 or so more damaging than carbon dioxide. Now what these guys have done is, with the use of technology, and this, mind you, farmers in India, okay? So what they have done with the use of technology is, they bring down the water for a certain period of time, good enough to kill the bacteria, the anaerobic bacteria, so there is no methane emission, and then the water comes back to its normal state. Now this does two things. First one, not so significant. The plant is kind of freaked out that it's losing water, and apparently it starts growing faster, the yield is more. Okay, that's not the significant part. Significant part is the reduction in the emission. Now this carbon credit is being sold at $20 per ton. Now all of us are aware that UN is running this gigaton challenge. So just in that gigaton challenge, there is an opportunity to make $20 billion. And what is the sector that we are talking about? It's agriculture, and which is having so many problems, especially in a country like India, where access to technology and even bare minimum things like water and fertilizer. So the potential in that industry or in that area is so much. So what I wanted to, kind of lead the audience to is, like it's not a property of huge multinational companies which have headquarters in Western Europe or in US. It is possible in the least expected area like agriculture. Now over to the difficult questions. Yeah, they are there.
Thank you, Chetan. I love that. I think you gave a beautiful example, which really touches the core of what I was going to say, which is sustainability affects everyone, and sustainability is contextual. Just like you said, Shekharda, that in Africa it is in certain context, in India it's in another context, in Netherlands it's in another. But what I have seen, and I earlier told you about our pledge towards powering lives, is that large corporations have a responsibility here, have a role to play here, to take the society along, to take the small, medium-sized enterprises along, support them, because it's everybody's game. We cannot solve this game alone. Large corporations can't. That's a realization. And if you don't take people along, you will lose your societal license to operate. So again, it is not philanthropy, it is business, and it's good business, right? So I'll give you 2 examples what we are doing at this space, right? I'll build on what Chetan had alluded to in terms of scope 3 emissions. With Indian customers, we are pairing up to reduce their scope 3 emissions, to look at green hydrogen opportunities. Some things are in public, so I can quote. So we are working with Tata Steel, we are working with Dalmia Cement, for example. We are working with ABG, Aditya Birla Group, to look at what we call as hard-to-abate sectors, the metals manufacturing, the cement, steel sector, and see how can we partner as Shell to essentially talk together, bring down the emissions while making our businesses profitable, right? So, and we see enormous appetite of Indian companies in that space. So we are no less sitting in India, working in India for India to contribute to the sustainability piece, right? So that is very much there. I think the last piece that I would like to mention is a bit to the agri-tech, and that is our 4th pledge, right, which is respecting nature. So we have recently, we have an arm of startup, we call it Game Changer, where we actually fund small, medium-sized startups towards progressing innovation. And we have recently floated a challenge on AI for good, AI for societal good, especially for agri-tech, right? So we are really looking at how can we partner with small, medium enterprises or startups to help them with our funding, with our mentorship, to essentially solve this last mile connectivity where it's needed,
Thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to present 2 aspects here, right? First one is just an example, from large companies, so you spoke about it, but I'll talk about how big and enormous this challenge is, because we're going to run out of planet very soon, right? And I think everyone just must, first of all, realize that as a reality, right? And I would say that as an organization, one of the things that we've done is we're a 120-year-old company. We had a sustainability function. One of the things that we chose to do is recognizing that a lot of stuff that we end up doing, Chetan's organization, ours, what we end up doing is we end up helping our customers, either by design or by default, right, in tackling their sustainability challenges. Now, these are 2 things which were rarely ever talking, our internal sustainability function and the customer-facing work that we were doing. About half a decade back, what we did was we brought our sustainability function, which was an internal function, on the outside, right? And we've exposed it to customers. Does 2 things. One, it allows us to talk about some of our own internal best practices and expose it to our clients. The second thing it also does is, by this exposure and by participating in client-facing activities, we can learn a lot more rapidly. So you're, in a way, sparking off more innovation, right? and spreading the goodness a little bit. Learning at the same time, spreading some of your learnings, right? Now, that's one which I wanted to cite. Your question was around smaller companies, who have to fight to stay afloat in a very competitive world, right? And you also talked about developed versus developing nation. Now, I'll say this. The choice really comes down, Shekhar, to the following. Do you want to do things the way they've been done in the past, right? Because if you have done things the way they've been done in the past, well, that past, the status quo which I previously referred to, is not going to be the future. So you're setting up your organization or your nation, for that matter, up for failure. And you got to really see it through that lens, right? Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that it must feel very odd, particularly as a developing nation, right? You cause such a little footprint, but at the same time, you have to pay such higher cost. But that's the reality right now. We must together find solutions to it, but the answer certainly is not doing what has been done, a decade ago and so forth. And I'll just pause there.
Thanks, Dilip. And it's funny that as we are speaking with COP27, the Loss and Damage Fund has just been announced. So
That's one of those innovations. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Krishnan, you heard all of them. Now, does your data support what they're saying?
Actually, now you have to go beyond the realms of data. But quick opinion, because your question was, how does this impact, say, the SMB sector? And somewhere inherent in your question is, there's other stuff to do for profitable business, and suddenly along comes sustainability, which I think may be a little bit of a paradox. So I would say maybe there are three ideas that we need to think about. So sustainability fundamentally is a less is more concept. Yeah. And in a less is more concept, you may not need the best resources of the developed world, much like Chetan, I think, talked about. There are less is more problems here as much as anywhere else, and we can pick those problems and solve for them. Second issue is, if you think about a Formula One race, you typically overtake only on the curves. Nobody overtakes on the straight. So we've got multiple curveballs, right? And here is an opportunity, here is a disruption by which you can overtake. I've already shared examples of NG and others, several organizations who have in the last 2 years alone shown significant business results out of focus on sustainability. Third aspect, I would say, is sort of a duality, which I think you can see from Suchi and Dilip, etc. The solutions today lie in digital technology, as Dilip you say. And this is where India is playing out an invisible hand for the last 2 decades. And consequently, today there is nothing to prevent us from thinking that we cannot craft solutions better than anywhere else in the world. So I just think it's an issue of business strategy and focus. So if promoters and CEOs choose to look at sustainability as the discontinuity which can help them overtake, there is no reason to imagine this will not, in that Atmanirbhar Bharat equation, as you're aware, domestic growth is only half. If you don't crack the export market, you're not going to get to this 5 trillion. And here is a way to attack a global market.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, what I am getting, and I hope everybody else is too, that sustainability is sustainable. All right. So to start off with, whether you're big, whether you're small, whether you're in a developed country, whether you're in a developing country, it's just the way you start to look at it, the lens that you start to use to look at it. Well, I think that's quite established. And as I saw, slowly the hall started to fill up as we kept talking. So obviously it's making sense to most people as well. I just want to come to the last part, which troubles me personally. And it is about this conversation about sustainability. For a lot of time, in my mind at least, and I'm quite ignorant about this, I feel a lot of the money that is spent in sustainability is spent in greenwashing rather than the actual activities which will change and make an impact. How much of that do you sense, whether in your own organization, I will not ask you to say because you will probably not say. But how much do you see across in industry or situations that you see that it is more talk than act? So we can start with you. And because finally we'll get to Krishnan and he will
Sure.
tell us whether whatever you are thinking
Sure.
is making.
Certainly, from my organizational perspective, there is a lot that is happening and it is visible, it is published. In fact, just like Suchi spoke about their 4-point framework, we have something called, we call it degree. We love our acronyms. D stands for decarbonization, E ethical, G is governance, R is reusable, and and then so that whole ESG is real thing. Okay. Now the question is, do companies talk a lot and do less? Probably, and I don't blame. This is how it starts, and I can quote from my healthcare experience. Now, much before meaningful use came into existence, people started talking about meaningful use. People said, this is how we will do it, and which is natural course. So there is certainly a lot of talk, but being followed up through actions. In many large organizations, that is being done because shareholders are demanding it. And as Krishnan was mentioning, there are activist investors, there are funds specifically set up for this. And when you hear companies like BlackRock talking about this, now that is, that indicates the arrival of the real stuff. They wouldn't do it if it was just for talking and not following up with action. So 2 points. Within the organization, certainly this is the fiduciary duty that we have towards our shareholders. Published, publicly available, is filed in our stock exchange filing and all that. As an organization, and this concept is always, people talk about it, people explain this to the world and then follow through. So I think that is the natural course and it's happening.
Fair enough. You agree?
I completely agree with Chetan. I think talk is a lot, but I also believe that greenwashing would only take us thus far. And in this world of hyper-connectivity, of the Phygital conference that you are hosting here, Shekhar, of the Web3, of the blockchain, of transparency, we will just get exposed if we don't do what we say, right? So say-do ratio is of utmost importance. We have to say what we do, but we also have to do what we say, right? So if we don't follow through, we will just get so badly exposed, we will be out of business. So I don't think that is anybody's motto here. I would just try to underline as to why there is still a perception of greenwashing, And I think it is, to Dilip's earlier point, it is complex, This journey cannot be traversed alone. This is a journey of collaboration. Therefore, you would see in LinkedIn feed, everybody signing an MOU with everybody else. And boy, do I know that those partnerships, to land them, it's so complex. And to make something out of them, to get past our lawyers and to get steel on ground, how complex it is, right? Despite all of that, I'll just leave you with one example with Dow Chemicals, supposed to be our staunch competitor in the field of chemicals industry. We have recently electrified one of our biggest cracker unit. So we have come together, Shell and Dow has come together to electrify crackers. Electrification of cracking actually takes off 130,000 roads of UK roads every year, right? It has happened within 2 years of our investment. You can look up in Google, it's public. So I think it's complex, but we are getting there. Just be with us.
Thank you. Dilip?
So I'll share some other data points, and data is your forte, so we'll come to you in a sec.
You are kind of
Anecdotes.
inducing them, I see.
Hang on. Anecdotes post-pandemic. I would say that and it's a known fact, I think most people would agree, that the adoption of digital went up by a factor of 5x or 10x, something like that, right? But one thing, which at least out of my conversations with business leaders, CXOs here in India, right? The number of people who are genuinely talking about sustainability, right? That has gone up by a factor of, I mean, I don't want to put a number in it, but it's not trivial. It's board's agenda. There are people who are devoting time, energy, and efforts towards it. Now, is there more talk and less action? Probably, right? But talk has to, it's a lead indicator,
Yep.
right? If talk doesn't happen, right, people are not devoting and not thinking about it, action is likely not going to happen, right? So I see nothing wrong with that per se. And of course, there are shades of gray. Some organizations are going to be leaders and some are going to be laggards. But eventually, someone's got to lead, right? So, I would say no yes or no answer over there. One aspect that I don't want to lose sight of also is, and a couple of you also commented, and I firmly believe that, practicing sustainability, it's a given if you really pull the camera back and look at the big picture, right? But at the same time, as you develop strategies to deal with all the complexity that comes in, and a couple of us spoke about the fact that digitization is a given, I think we also have to start thinking about building resilience within the organization. Because if you don't have a resilient, value chain or a supply chain, you're exposing yourself to, I'll give a very simple example. Anytime your value chain gets interrupted, the amount of sustainability harm that you're creating is enormous. So that's a new lens that I would like all of us to be thinking about. And I'm not convinced that enough attention is being paid to it. Yeah, so another one aspect.
Yeah. No, that's very, very insightful. That's very insightful. Krishnan, to round it all off.
Yeah, true. So, I'm sure, I think Dilip said it very well, there is greenwashing going on right now. But the narrative starts first and then things start happening. So, very good parallel to me is cloud computing. So, back pre-2010, cloud computing was very similar. Everybody was saying, nobody actually had it. Some people said it was just an economic model of how to suddenly, and I think the big issue is a set of sort of a concatenation of forces got together. One was, of course, the pandemic itself. Then you had forces like 5G, Web3, which now make business models in the cloud possible. And suddenly today it is mainstream. There is no washing. If you're not in the cloud, and you can go and look at hordes of software companies who are still on-prem and what's happening to their share price and so on, the market turns around and tells you. And I think that's exactly the phenomenon we are seeing. With narrative has started, there's consumer choice, there's employee choice, there is shareholder choice, all of that is aligning. There may possibly be some technology disruptors still required. I think, for instance, one of the speakers talked about materials and stuff that could not be exponential in their curve. But it will happen, there is no doubt.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, all of you. And I've been noticing that our customer for the future has been attentively listening to us. So I'm sure that this is all for those customers and the next generation. And if we are not responsible, and if we don't do the right thing, and if we do not understand how sustainable sustainability is, as it's very commonly said, there is no plan B. So thank you very much for your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We had a very good conversation about sustainability. And on the stage with us today, we have got 3 partners who are partnering this event. I hope next time Shell will also be there. Thank you.